For the record, committee member Huffman has left the meeting, but the committee maintains quorum at 18 members.
Okay, thank you. All right, in the interest of some of the other members' schedules, we're going to jump back ahead and address item number 12, discussion and possible action to approve, modify, or reject subcommittee on retailers' recommendations. Mr. Dombrowski.
Thank you. We had two meetings of the subcommittee, very lively meetings. A number of issues were raised, most of which you can see is by the recommendations and that were developed. However, it's become apparent that much of what we were talking about is statutory or is being addressed in other ways. So I want to try to streamline this section and focus on recommendation number 1, methods of delivery. That was a very interesting discussion in terms of privacy issues, in terms of vehicles. So we want to continue and recommend adoption of that one. Recommendation number 2, hours of operation. It's pretty clear that it's unnecessary. Recommendation number 3, barriers to entry. There really isn't anything we can do on that with this regulatory side. Number 4, waste, we've already addressed this morning in a different subcommittee. And number 5, the striking the language, that was actually an attempt to go after the compassionate use issue, which again is being addressed in different ways by this committee. So we want to make a motion to adopt recommendation 1 as written.
Okay, there's a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
All right. That was Mr. Sweeney? All right, thank you, sir. All right, any discussion by the members? No. All right, seeing none, open that up for public comment.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Hey, everyone. Just because of time and the hefty agenda we have left today, we're going down to 1 minute for public comment. So sorry about that. Just a quick reminder that we do have a court reporter here. She's furiously taking down your comments. You do not have to state your name for the record. So with that, the current public comment is on the current motion, which is for retailers to adopt recommendation number 1 as currently written. So if you have a public comment on that, please queue up. We'll take the first 3 commenters seated, and then everyone else, if you could just queue up down the center aisle, that'd be great. All right, go ahead.
My name is Zachary Pitts with the California Cannabis Delivery Alliance. I am in strong support of recommendation number 1. I do want to clarify that the staff comments said that the Bureau does not require a specific type of vehicle for delivery as long as it is enclosed. We both want to have more secure vehicles that can carry more product and not have product or limits on the price of what can be carried, as well as unenclosed vehicles or two-wheeled vehicles, and that was a lot of the point of what we had, the comments that we had submitted, and it seemed like what the committee had discussed. Yes, thank you very much.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Dr. Lynn Silver from the Public Health Institute and clinical professor at UCSF. I'm a pediatrician. In reference to methods of delivery, we would oppose allowing delivery of adult use cannabis in general because of evidence showing that it increases access of youth. But if it is allowed, the regulations need to be clarified to clearly require age verification of the recipient face-to-face at the time of delivery. That is not, in my opinion, clear in the current regulations, and we would encourage to block facilitating youth access that if adult use delivery is allowed, which we recommend against, that age verification be required. Thank you.
All right, go ahead.
Thank you. Max Vigalos with K3 Consulting on behalf of both Delivery Alliance and Flocana. First, definitely supportive of the methods of delivery and recommendation 1. I want to reiterate unenclosed vehicles as being added. Additionally, we would urge the Bureau to reconsider the limit on carrying capacity. Furthermore, unfortunately, the point number 3 in the staff comments references BPC 26161. That refers to business transactions. It does not refer to business-to-consumer transactions. And so we believe that it should be adopted to have the delivery request receipt only have the license number for delivery services and not have their address, because that statutory requirement does not apply to this particular instance. Furthermore, we would ask that the hours of operations language and the other recommendations do be considered, specifically recommendations 2 and 5, because we do not believe that recommendation 5 has been covered sufficiently with the other compassion discussions. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, hi.
My name is Chris Hope, and I'm with Angeles Emeralds, a cannabis advocacy group for Los Angeles County, and I also have a company, a delivery service called Sequoia Wellness. And I wanted to address the issues of methods of delivery. As some have stated, I would like to see an increase in the limits. I also would like to, and I see nothing here, of an opportunity for us to go into the elder care communities. What we find many times is under the business model that the BCC is requiring is somebody's going to have to know exactly what they need, and many patients don't. It's an education system, and they don't have the capacity to go to a dispensary and learn it. So we want to be able to bring the dispensary to them and be able to provide them with some knowledge of the products. If there's track and trace, it will be reconciled at the end of the day, end of the week. So I'm trying to understand what the issue is with that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. All right, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Joseph Aroni, founder and director of the Sweet Leaf Collective. We provide free medical marijuana to low-income terminally ill patients in the San Francisco Bay Area. So at the retail committee meeting, the subcommittee meeting in Sacramento, there was a motion that was passed about ID cards. That's an issue for our patients because many of them are housebound. It's difficult for them to make it out to get a card. Also, these cards have a 3-month wait. And when you're talking about people with a terminal illness, that's unacceptable. The cards are also cost prohibitive. And it would be great, the motion that was passed previously is that we could do the same system that we had before where a doctor's recommendation was enough. I don't see why we need to jump through an extra hoop to have them have ID cards when they're already terminally ill and have mobility issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Ryan Miller of Operation EVAC, educating veterans about cannabis. And I'd like to echo what Joe just mentioned about recommendation number 5, and we really need the retail committee to seize their agency on this.
Sorry, we're going to have to focus here. I apologize, but we're only addressing item number 1, which is part of the motion.
So I'm asking you not to make me choose between compassionate cannabis access and my constitutional rights to bear firearms. So
it's not on the list also.
Thank you. All right, hi.
Ross Gordon, California Growers Association, support consideration of recommendation number 5. Everything should be done to help patients that can be done. This is a different recommendation from ones considered previously and should also be considered. I think there's consensus in this room that every single thing should be done to help patients.
Thank you.
Hi, Jonah Irvine. I'm CEO of Responser Tech. We're a youth safety organization, software and services. It's been brought up about age verification. I think it's very important that on delivery and others that you use age verification. There are various systems throughout the world, which I think is very important to take a look at. We happen to have one that we're working with right now that they're out of the UK, and they're on the UK Digital Policy Alliance, and they're actually developing parameters for age verification systems. So this thing about I'm 18, click, or I'm 21, that does not work. It's not going to work, but there's systems out there that will work, and it will help with the delivery. It will help in the stores. And since so many things are going to be online, it will help for the advertising and the other things that are online. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Dan Georgiadis on behalf of Purple Lotus Patient Center. After we're done discussing the recommendation on number 1, I suggest bringing a motion on recommendation number 5. The general prohibition on free cannabis goods is a smart regulation. However, you need a smart exception to go with it. By just deleting, a few words, you really make it commercially feasible, and you allow compassion to exist still within the whole program. The ID card issued through Health and Safety Code 11362.775, I believe it is. I don't know if we can get a count on how many have even been issued. They come through the dispensaries rarely. And just by deleting those words, you're going to allow for compassion to still flourish in the medical market, to still flourish in California. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul Hansberry, Lovingly and Legally. I want to talk about recommendation number 4 for waste. There's going to be an awful lot of waste generated from retail dispensaries and retail outlets that have backstock after July 1st. I would strongly advise that you extend the transition period along with the adult use and medical to allow them to sell the products that they have in their back stock. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Mr. Chairman. So we are limiting this to methods of delivery?
That's my intention.
Yeah, that was the motion, is we're only talking about that piece. I've been trying.
Hi, this is my name is O. I represent poor brown people, patients that are currently being left out of all of this. So I support the recommendation from methods of delivery, but I also urge you guys to come up with something right now to discuss the barriers to entry, because we are being left out. Our communities have been under attack, and I know we're going to go over the social equity program, but it needs to be addressed. So please, thank you.
Thank you. All right, Chair, that ends public comment.
Okay, so we have a motion, and Mr. Sweeney had a second. Any other conversation with the members?
I move the previous question.
All right, have a roll call vote, please.
Baboulian.
Aye.
Cermak.
Abstain.
Clifford. Dombrowski.
Aye.
Farrow.
Aye.
Heidelbach Terremoto.
Aye.
Parada.
Aye.
Jacobson. Abstain. Nevedal.
Aye.
Nikita.
No.
Peck.
Aye.
Ron.
Aye.
Stevenson.
Aye.
Sweeney. Aye.
Todd.
Aye.
Woolsey.
Aye.
Wu. You.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Anything else?
No, we are, as we discussed this morning, we're going to put the statutory changes on the next meeting.
Okay. Moving any of the other items. If the chairs. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on to, let's see, item number 6, discussion and possible action to approve, modify, or reject Subcommittee on Enforcement recommendation. Our chair, Kristen Lynch, is not here today, so do I have a volunteer from the Enforcement Committee to step forward and provide a bit of a summary for us?
I can do it.
Thank you.
I can't promise to do it exactly how you want me to do it, but I will do it. There were a lot of recommendations that came out of the enforcement subcommittee. A number of them are 6 are identified as statutory changes, so I won't go over them now. I'm quickly going to run through all the recommended changes related to regulatory changes, and then my proposal is that we group them maybe into 2 groups or so to handle them, because they are vary in terms of the topic, and not all of the recommendations even had a consensus coming out of the subcommittee. So I can't move for them all because I don't agree with them all. So let me just run through them quickly. So the first recommendation is on the enforcement authority related to advertisements. And so the recommendation is that the Bureau should clearly identify the enforcement authority regarding advertisement and placement, clearly communicate who the enforcement authority is and how to contact them with complaints, collect data on enforcement actions, and require all advertisements have information regarding the license holder placing the advertisements. Let me see really quickly. The staff comments to this one was that the licensing authorities have the ability to enforce the statutory and regulatory provisions. The licensing authorities have contact information for where to submit complaints, that they will be collecting data, and that the advertisements and marketing already are required to identify the licensee. I think the recommendation goes more to making this information available to the public so that the public can contact and instigate investigations of advertisements they see. So that was the thrust of the recommendation. The second recommendation is to clarify the difference between citations and orders of abatement and clarify references. So the recommendation is that the Bureau of Cannabis Control should, 1, clarify an order of abatement versus citation, and 2nd, clean up language and clarify its process and procedural guidelines within the regulations, reference, and citation sections. And then the staff comment was that they can examine the text of the regulation and determine what clarifications should be made to make that clear. The third recommendation is about video surveillance. The recommendation is that all licensing authorities should require that all areas where waste is stored, processed, and handled and properly disposed of be covered by video surveillance. And the staff comments to that was that they have the authority to consider adding this requirement. However, this would increase the costs for licensees to have the additional video surveillance equipment and video storage. The fourth recommendation is about security personnel standards. The recommendation is that all licensing authorities should consider establishing standards for security personnel for cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution. The comments from the Bureau are that current regulations require all retail licenses, micro business licenses that engage in retail sale, and event organizers to hire security personnel. They can extend this requirement to all licensees, but it would again increase the costs for licensees who have premises that aren't open to the public, which are the ones that are already covered. The fifth recommendation is about health-related claims. This recommendation requires that the Department of Public Health should develop enforcement provisions to ensure that the public has the ability to challenge health-related claims about cannabis and a means to adjudicate evidence for their claims. The staff comments from the Department of Public Health say that this is addressed in a label prohibition in Section 40410E, that any health-related statement that's untrue or about any health-related statement that's untrue or misleading, the statement must be supported by the totality of the scientific evidence, for which there's scientific agreement among experts qualified. Again, I think the recommendation is more about the public's ability to engage in that with the agency. Number 6 is also a recommendation about advertising. The recommendation is that the Bureau should, 1, clarify rules and provide direction regarding what type and where advertising is allowed, and 2nd, collect data on when and where advertising rules were violated and if the violation was targeted to minors. The Bureau's comments are that the Business and Professions Code Section 26150 defines advertisement. For the purposes of MCRSA, advertising is prohibited in certain areas and that it's restricted based on population expected to view it. So that's the definition of what's in the existing law. And that the Bureau cannot change these statutory requirements, but could explore clarifying language within its regulations. Okay, recommendation number 7 is about unlicensed collectives. And that is that the Bureau, before taking any enforcement action on unlicensed collectives, should give the business the opportunity to demonstrate an attempted effort for good faith compliance. The Bureau's comment is that the Bureau has discretion to provide warnings and education to a person as to how to obtain a license if they're unlicensed before taking enforcement action. Recommendation number 8 is about public records. The recommendation is that the Bureau should include language in regards to sharing information between the Bureau and local government entities that acknowledge the information shared is in accordance with the Public Requests Act and protects information that's not discoverable under the Public Information Request Act. The staff comments from the Bureau is that the Bureau is required to follow the laws related to access to information under the Public Records Act. The Bureau's regulations only apply to licensees, therefore, and such statements would not be appropriate in regulation. Recommendation number 9 is on labor standards. The recommendation is that all licensing authorities should explore amending the regulations to include violations of labor standards as part of the licensing process and enforcement, which should include revocation of the license. The staff comments from the Bureau are that the Business and Professions Code 26201 states that standards established by the state for health and safety and environmental protection, food safety, security, testing, and worker protection shall be the minimum standards for all licensees statewide. Additionally, Section 26030 provides the grounds for discipline, which is failure to comply with any state law, regulation, or ordinance, and therefore the statute already provides this recommendation in part, but the Bureau can amend regulations to include a requirement that applicants disclose any prior labor violations. Okay, and that is all we are busy subcommittee. So that's all the statutory recommended changes. REGS, all the regulatory recommendations, not the statutory recommendations. So I'm going to move now. I've sort of them grouped really very roughly by subtopic. I'm going to first move that we adopt the recommendations that are related to advertising and youth provisions. That was recommendation number 1 about clearly identifying the enforcement authority for advertisements. The recommendation related to health-related claims, that they ensure that they develop enforcement provisions to ensure that the public has the ability to challenge health-related claims. And then number 6, which was advertising, about just clarifying the rules and providing direction related to the types and where advertising is allowed. And that it collects data on where advertising rules were violated and where the violation was directed at minors. That's my first motion.
Second.
All right, any comments, discussion by the members?
Which recommendation numbers are we
on? It was recommendation number 1, number 5, and number 6.
Comment on number 5 on the health-related claims. Just in legal industry, there are a lot of consumer legal protections already in place as it relates to product liability and claims that you make. Again, mentioned it earlier, you already have the FDA that oversees and enforces against false claims made by product manufacturers. Here to require an additional layer for the health department to develop additional rules, I don't think there's anything that precludes anyone from the public to challenge claims made on a product, any given product in the packaging, and to create an additional layer of authority where it's really in the world of the FDA. Might create problems, and not sure I agree with that recommendation.
I don't think we can trust the FDA to do too much here. And I think this is more about promulgating and clarifying what the enforcement provisions are so that more of the public is aware of that to be helping the bureaus.
Just a note, the FDA has sent out a number of letters relating to health claims made by products nationwide over the last several years. So the FDA has, on some level, paid attention to this matter.
I actually have a problem with that too. The FDA, in my opinion, has not been aggressive enough in addressing the health claims that are made, and I can cite a number of examples of companies selling products and making health claims over the internet, and it's not okay. This is health claim. The FDA stays away from this because it's not a federally regulated environment, and so in the public youth subcommittee, we have a similar recommendation, but it's stricter, saying that there should be no health claims at all, because until you've done the research to show that this is an effective medicine for a specific indication, there is no evidence from well-designed studies conducted in a manner which is consistent with generally recognized scientific procedures and principles. And so I'm a research scientist, and I look at a lot of these claims made on the internet and by companies selling products, and they are listed as research, but they're not peer-reviewed research. And in the scientific world, peer review is what defines a scientifically valid study. And unless it's published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal, I think there should be absolutely no health claims being made. It's confusing to the public.
All right, any other comments?
Actually, I'll have one more. And my comment would be, in addition to that, it's precisely because there are no standards, it's precisely because there is no research and studies done. Earlier, we were talking about laboratory testing, and for the state to develop a standardized laboratory set of rules, it was projected to take 36 months. My question is, how long would it take to develop a standard for health claims when the FDA doesn't have enough information to put out anything and be able to police it because it is still a Schedule I drug? For a state to do it, A, how long is that going to take to be able to oversee it appropriately? B, what's the cost of that? And C, what happens when the FDA does have jurisdiction and this thing is rescheduled from a one, and the FDA does step in? Do the efforts extended, the efforts put out there, do they become worthless? And so that's where I think there needs to be a lot more before we allow or don't allow, as far as recommendations go, on health claims.
Okay.
And I have a question for clarification, because I'm not so familiar with the term health claims. I am more familiar with disease claims versus standard and function claims. So like a disease claim would be claiming that the product treats a disease, right? Epilepsy or cancer. But in the botanical realm, with other botanical products, we can talk about it being a nervine or an analgesic, and I'm just wondering if this language proposes expansion beyond disease claims so that folks wouldn't be able to talk about cannabis relieving pain or talk about cannabis. So I just am curious why the term health claims and not disease claims, or...
I think generally it refers to advertising, and I think in the interest of public health, we have to err on the side of caution. And if there's no research to support that cannabis cures cancer, then we can't say that cannabis cures cancer. But that doesn't prohibit people from talking about how their experience with cannabis has helped them. This is strictly related to how companies can advertise their products and what claims they can make with their products. So it doesn't prohibit public discussion on the benefits and the risks, but unless we have real scientific evidence to back up claims, I think we err on the side of caution. We don't make those claims in advertising a specific product.
To add a couple of lines to that, on the medical side, the patient goes to a doctor, the doctor recommends the cannabis precisely because there's a potential, in his professional opinion, that it would cure or alleviate some of the symptoms associated with their health condition. On the adult use side, it's adult use. It's not technically considered medicinal because it's being purchased and consumed for recreational adult use purposes. So again, going back to the health claims, whether or not there's actual scientific studies out there that it cures cancer or not, I think that's kind of one of the reasons why we're even here as an industry, public committee. It really is undeniable that it does impact it. Now, the issue I would have with restricting the companies from being able to make certain claims on a packaging is you leave it with the consumer, you're also shutting down the conversation before, just when the conversation's starting to really pick up and people are starting to look at it, it's becoming that much more acceptable, more organizations are looking at it. We shut down the conversation and just limit the health discussions to the consumer. I think we're really stepping backwards.
I'm slightly concerned just about the nomenclature. Health claims, I'm not sure what that means. Does it mean disease claims and any effects that a person might experience from cannabis that can't be discussed? So I'm not really clear where the boundary is on this between, say, disease claims with which the FDA regulates and standard and function claims which are common in the botanical and nutraceutical industry.
Member Nikita, so I believe the phrase health-related statement comes from the regulations already adopted by CDPH. And there's already something in the provisions that says you cannot advertise a product or label a product with a health-related statement that is untrue or misleading. I don't think this recommendation expands that, limits that. I don't think it affects that at all. I think what the recommendation is asking for is for CDPH to come up with an enforcement protocol that's transparent, open to the public, and that allows people who have an issue with the way something's being marketed to bring that to CDPH's attention in a way that is more robust than exists today, at least in the experience of some of us sitting up here. So to Mr. Bulbulian's concerns, I don't see this as an expansion of the prohibitions, and I don't read it that way, and I don't think Dr. Cermak reads it that way either, but so that's just what I'd like to say as a clarification here. It's just when we talked about this at the subcommittee level, it was to get something out to the public where they can interface with it in a way that was easier than, going online and lodging a complaint and not hearing back for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something like that.
I agree. This is not an expansion of what's already in the regulations. It's more looking at the enforcement provisions, because a regulation without enforcement is like an old man with no teeth. You're just going to gum it. So what we really want is to be able to enforce what's already in the regulations and involve the public more in that.
So on that, I would say the recommendation, the way it reads, is public health should develop enforcement provisions. I just said guidelines instead of provisions. And I know this isn't how it's going to go in, and it's a recommendation, but there is a big difference between provisions and guidelines.
All right, any others? Okay, let's go ahead and take public comment then.
All right. I think the woman on the far left, yeah, I think you were standing there first, so if you want to start.
Okay. Hi, it's Dr. Lynn Silver again from the Public Health Institute. I want to speak strongly in support of these three motions and the comments made by Dr. Jacobson, Mr. Nikita, and Dr. Chermak. The market in our investigations is replete with false and unsubstantiated claims of health effects on numerous pieces of advertising that we have identified in the field. That is not acceptable. Not only does it need to be in our regulations as it currently is, but there need to be clear mechanisms, transparent mechanisms for citizens to act on this. And we need to have clear data from our regulatory agencies on advertising to minors and other abuses. So these are very important provisions that will help maintain a transparent and well-regulated market, and we strongly support them and appreciate their inclusion. And we'll comment later on the prohibition on health claims for adult use products, which we also support. But these are very important first practical steps. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to restate, we're taking public comment under enforcement. The motion on the floor is to accept recommendations number 1, 5, and 6. Okay, next.
Good afternoon, Susan Tibbin. With regard to health-related claims, in an effort to clarify, there are in fact documented studies in terms of reduction of seizures in animals and inflammation in humans, particularly with the use of THCA. An animal-based study is set to be released in the next few months and was cited at a recent CVMB meeting in Sacramento. So I would strongly urge the panel to look toward Ms. Neverdahl's comments in terms of the kind of nomenclature that's used on herbal products. Calendula, for example, as a soothing anti-inflammation agent. And being mindful of the health and safety of both humans and animals, I think there's a middle ground to talk about well-documented efficacy. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up. Go ahead.
I would like to start off by saying I'm seriously disappointed in this entire committee for their lack of knowledge on this specific medicine. You said, Mrs. Jacobson, that there are no studies out there that have been peer-reviewed. I found one right now from Life Science, an efficient new cannabinoid antiemetic in pediatric oncology. If we were going to set aside pediatric oncology and saying that that is not important, and saying that these claims are not substantiated, you should at least go into and look to see if the research has been done, and it has. Research has supported this, and the war on this science needs to stop. I support substantiated health claims, and they have been substantiated. You cannot block this entire industry from pushing a product that is medicinally active and helps people that need it. Labeling restrictions should be substantiated.
Thank you. All right, next up.
So I'm just going to give a little perspective and story from my point of view as a Marine Corps veteran who's also in the space industry operating licensed. You know, my experience, I got into this about 12 years ago. My dad came in, helped me. He was a primetime shuttle van driver from the airports. My dad saw me as a veteran with my PTSD and TBI coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan and what I went through. He started doing research because he's like, you know, I don't want you just smoking and getting high, you know, because it's more about that. You're telling me it's about the medicine. So he started looking into this one doctor, and the group's called Tikkun Olam out of Israel, and about research in juicing. And this is about 10 years ago. And then all of a sudden I started juicing, and we didn't know what we were doing, but it started helping me. This Halloween will be 10 years sober off of pills, cigarettes, and alcohol. I share my story with other veterans that come into our retail store to tell with them my experience, my medical benefit that I got from this plant, this miracle. And I just hope that you don't expand to the point where I'm afraid to share that story because of liability of getting sued.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Joan Irvine, Response to Tech Youth Safety. I want to talk about the advertising, number 1, and I guess number 6. I think talking about guidelines is very important rather than just having regulations. I came from an industry where we developed policies for the adult entertainment industry. We received awards and awards from the state of California and the city of LA and the city of San Francisco for our effort for labeling websites and labeling advertising. And the industry did this themselves. The industry can develop guidelines. Also, when you're talking about advertising, there's only certain companies that will take age-restricted advertising. So the companies are already doing that themselves. So that you're putting more regulation on top of that really doesn't help, while the industry can be doing that, and this is something we're going to be doing, helping the industry with this. So thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Jackie Subeck, Cannabis Advocate. I want to talk about number 6, advertising. I would like to make a recommendation that the committee adds a provision that expands the ability for local control to understand their community. I happen to be a resident of the city of West Hollywood, and West Hollywood has a very large LGBT community. There are billboards in West Hollywood that you would never see anywhere else. They are related to HIV testing and so forth. They just wouldn't show up probably in another area, but they're completely relevant and well accepted in the West Hollywood community. I would say the same thing goes for cannabis. We're going to have medically driven, wellness-driven messages that will need marketing, and they're not always just about adult use and sell, sell, sell. So I think that I want to be able to make sure that this committee understands that there is a clear difference in marketing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Greetings. I just want all to be aware, or just keep in mind, that the FDA is more concerned with synthetic so-called medicine as opposed to natural medicines. We are here to promote something that is grown naturally and cultivated out of love, as opposed to something that is put together synthetically in a laboratory that does not always help. We know that there are plenty of people die all year from pills that is promoted by the so-called FDA. And we are here in regards to something that is natural as opposed to synthetic.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Stephanie Hopper with Candescent. I definitely am in support of recommendation number 1. Requiring people to put their license number in advertising will help the public identify who is regulated and who is out there operating more in the black market, which can't substantiate that they're not using pesticides or other things that are truly harmful to them. The FDA, they did speak to us in a conference last May, and it's not that they're not concerned, it's just they know that cannabis does not kill people. Therefore, it's lower in priority, and due to the fact that they don't have a large budget, they just don't have the enforcement. I think it's very important that California take on that enforcement and make sure that you look at public safety. And a great way to do that is to go after the advertising. And there is a big difference between talking about cannabinoids and how they interact in a human body than a specific product. And especially when someone's just talking about their product and making claims, that's when I think that we have a right to step in.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul Hansberry, Lovingly and Legally. Of course, you should have to put your license number on your advertising. That makes just total sense. With regards to claims, health claims, if you go to PubMed, I mean, there are thousands upon thousands of published studies on medical cannabis. So being able to justify those claims would be important. Enforcing them, if you say that, yes, if you rub a bud on your head, it's going to grow hair, obviously that's a false claim. But there are things that can be substantiated and can be proven. The research that some people are calling for with the double-blind studies, people can't afford them, and first of all, they can't get the funding for them, they can't get the license for them from the DEA, and if they do, they have to use cannabis that's grown in Mississippi. So there are studies, there are documents, there are publications on the efficacy of cannabis, and that should be enough to substantiate it. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, next up.
My name is Ralph Trueblood. I'm with WHAM of Santa Cruz and the California Compassion Coalition. I just want to make a distinction between exploitation and anecdotal sharing of information regarding the efficacy of cannabis, beg your pardon. The people we serve are very vulnerable and are susceptible to false claims of cure. And I think that it's important that they be protected. They're equally entitled to be able to receive information in an anecdotal way as to the benefits to others of using cannabis. I think that one of the big distinctions is written advertising as opposed to speaking one-on-one with your provider. So I think there should be a distinction made. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
A politician I respect once told me that regulators are really good at regulating people who walk into the door. I think we want to remember that when we're talking about enforcement, of going after people who are definitely not involved in the process, not trying to be regulated, so that when we have an issue with someone who is going forward through the process, we could work with them to correct it as opposed to coming down with a heavy hammer. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next up.
I'm Joshua Mandel. I'm an attorney at the law firm Ackerman. And with respect to recommendation number 5, I just want to point out or be mindful of the fact that California has a lot of law already on the books with respect to false advertising in its business and professions code, and that businesses that do engage in false advertising do often suffer the consequence through private litigation that fills our courts. And so I would think or hope that businesses that would overreach in terms of labeling of health claims may be mindful that they may do so at their own peril and face the consequence of consumer litigation.
Thank you. I can't actually remember if you've already spoken on this agenda item, but I'm going to ask folks to please.
It is just a brief point of information.
Thank you.
I just have a brief point of information. According to the FD&C Act that created the FDA is funded by pharmaceutical companies intentionally. So I think that must be considered here.
Thank you very much. Chair, that concludes. Oh, do we have one more?
Good afternoon. I'm Barbara McGee, and I'm with LA Miracle Cure. Now, what that is a podcast. It comes on weekends on iHeartRadio. I want you to know how difficult it is for me to get a medical professional to come on and talk about the benefits of cannabis because they're afraid to come out and speak publicly about the successes of cannabis when there is no other alternative. I want you to also to know that I am an ex-train operator for BART. I fell in the tube and I crushed my leg when I was about 28. Right now, I need a double knee transplant, and I refuse to do it. Somebody gave me a sample of cannabis, and I used it. My doctor gave me opiates. Do you realize that if you get one prescription and you do it like they tell you, you'll be hooked? Thank God somebody gave me a sample of topical cannabis, and I'm walking.
Thank you, Barbara. All right, Chair, that concludes the public comment.
Okay. So I have a motion and a second. Any other discussion by the members? Dr. Cermak.
I'd like to point out to the committee that there's nothing in this that limits the availability of cannabis to any patient who wants it. We've created in California an interesting intermediary category, and cannabis is the only one in it. It's not a prescription medication. It's not a pharmaceutical. FDA has nothing to do with it. It's not a botanical because you require a doctor's recommendation to be taking it. So we've got something which is a real intermediary here. And I think it is in our best interest to make sure that any health claims made about it can be substantiated. Now, that doesn't mean substantiated by the FDA. It means by a panel of experts who are specifically trained in order to understand the scientific research. And I hope people understand we've never said that there's no scientific research that validates, verifies the use of cannabis in certain disease conditions. It exists. The Academy of Medicine came out with a great report analyzing the evidence that shows for what things it has strong evidence, for what conditions it has less strong evidence. That's not what's in doubt here. All that we're asking is that we have a regulation saying you can't make unsubstantiated health claims. We need an enforcement provision to be able to make sure that those people who are making health claims, that the public knows how to challenge those, so that those people making those health claims can provide the substantiation that they have.
So I'm struggling a little bit with this one because, if you read the staff comments on this, we already have a mechanism in the state to deal with, unsubstantiated claims and, the public's right to be able to challenge those claims. And so creating, an additional layer of regulation on top of that, part of our conversation at the subcommittee was, focused not on necessarily creating an additional layer of regulation, but allowing the folks that may not be as savvy or may not be able to dig into some of the, California law to be able to identify that pathway if they do have concerns to raise those concerns. In our conversation, if I recall correctly, there was this discussion of, well, maybe all we need to do on the Bureau's website and, in these public venues is just to provide this, if you have issue and if there are concerns, here is the mechanism that already exists within the state of California to address those concerns, rather than us creating an additional layer of regulation. So,
well, and I'll just add that that's what what we're voting on is in line of what you said. It's about making, and those were what we adopted in the subcommittee, it's about making the public aware of how to access, rules and regulations and remedies that the agency says are already existing, but how when you come across a product or a claim that you don't feel is valid or you feel like you're being marketed to in a way that is incorrect or without basis, that you understand how to contact the agency and how to bring that to their attention.
But I think the wording here is a little bit more direct than that. We're talking about enforcement provisions, challenging health claims, and adjudicating. And those three words there, I think, make it sound more like a recommendation for developing another layer of regulations. So, if we'd be amenable, I'd say we lighten that language up quite a bit and pull out those terms. And basically, it's exactly what we said. We should move toward, which is, providing a mechanism or an education or an online tool or, a little bit more easier access for those folks who want to move forward with a claim, but not create that additional layer.
I don't think it actually creates an additional, I'm just going to push back a little, I don't think it creates an additional requirement. The recommendation is simply that they develop an enforcement provision as a way to enforce what they're already requiring.
But I think but again, I think that mechanism already exists under other provisions. So
but they don't, in the staff comments, they reflect the rule, but they don't say what the mechanism is.
Can you comment on that? Because I think we're talking.
To chime in on that, if you already have regulations in place and you have a regulatory body that oversees those regulations, you already have your enforcement mechanism in place for the existing regulations. I'm all for anything that's educational, anything that sets out additional guidelines for it, as long as it doesn't set additional layers of provisions and enforcement. And I guess one of the reasons why I'm a little more on my toes on this one is because it's specifically in the enforcement subcommittee and not necessarily to the health one or the public health committee. But I think we're all kind of saying the same thing. We're all for guidelines. We're all for, in fact, that's one of the ways we can further the conversation as it relates to cannabis and medical conditions. But yeah, the way it reads more enforcement than it does guidelines.
So my name is Christina Dempsey. I'm the outreach manager for the California Department of Public Health's Manufactured Cannabis Safety Branch. Our office does have authority over labeling of manufactured products, advertising done by manufacturers, and we do have the enforcement authority to be able to enforce issues with health-related claims. The language in our regulations about prohibiting health-related claims that are unsubstantiated actually comes from statute. And then we do have an additional piece in our regulations that allows for what we call characteristic anticipated effects, which is something to help consumers understand what might happen if they take a cannabis product. Things like it might make you feel sleepy, it might impair your ability to drive, it might make you drowsy. Those are the ones that we see the most commonly. And then there was one more thing I was going to tell you. We also, on our website, have an ability for anyone from the public to file a complaint. It's fairly prominent on our website. It's on the first page and every page of our website. And it does, when you go to that file a complaint page, it does make clear that you can file complaints about products themselves. We could certainly talk about further developing that outreach and education for the public about that mechanism exists.
Thank you. I think what this is doing is saying that we are recommending that you do that outreach, that just having something on the website is inadequate.
Having heard that staff is already addressing this and that there's a lot of controversy on number 5, I'd like to ask the maker of the motion to perhaps remove number 5 from the vote so that we can vote on 1 and 6 and vote on 5 separately.
Ms. Todd, are you amenable to that?
Sure. So we'll vote on 1 and 3 and then move number 5? 1 and 6, okay.
All right. So is that your motion? I'm going to take a second on that, Mr. Sweeney. All right. Do we have to open up for public discussion? All right. Well, because we've modified the motion, guess what? We get to open it up for public comment again. So is anybody interested in commenting on 1 and 6 as a separate? Seeing none, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I move the...
All right. Call for the roll, please.
Bobulian.
Aye.
Cermak.
Aye.
Clifford. Dombrowski.
Aye.
Farrow.
Aye.
Heidelbach Terremoto.
Aye.
Harada.
Aye.
Jacobson.
Aye.
Nevedal.
Aye.
Nikita.
Aye.
Peck.
Aye.
Ron.
Aye.
Stevenson.
Aye.
Sweeney.
Aye.
Todd.
Aye.
Woolsey.
Aye.
Woo.
Aye.
You.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay. All right. Now back to
Okay, then
item
I
number
move
5.
number 5.
I'll give you a
Do we have a
second.
motion? Do we have a second? All right, Mr. Sweeney, thank you. All right, any further discussion on the colleagues?
What's the motion?
The motion's just to move number 5, which was about health-related, Department of Public Health developing enforcement provisions for the rules against health-related claims.
Okay, any further public comment? All right, let's call for the question.
Bobulian.
For clarification, it's the way it reads currently, right? Nay.
Cermak.
Aye.
Clifford. Dombrowski. No. Farrow.
Abstain.
Heidelbach Terremoto.
Nay.
Harada.
Nay.
Jacobson.
Aye.
Nevedal.
Nay.
Nikita.
Aye.
Peck.
Nay.
Ron.
Nay.
Stevenson.
Nay.
Sweeney.
Nay.
Todd.
Aye.
Woolsey.
Nay.
Woo.
Nay.
You.
Abstain.
Motion fails.
All right, I'm now going to move some more of them. So the next category of ones that I'm going to move are ones which pretty much requested sort of clarification in a number of areas, and the Bureau's response was that regulations already address these things, but we could perhaps clarify further. So they're hopefully not quite as controversial a group. And that's recommendation number 2, about clarifying the difference between citations and orders of abatement. Clarifying enforcement against unlicensed collectives, where the recommendation was demonstrate an effort for good compliance, and the Bureau said they already have discretion to provide warnings and education to a person. Number 8, that was number 7. Number 8 is the Public Records Act request, which is about including information about sharing and clarification with bureaus and local agencies under the Public Record Act request. And the Bureau's comments was that they followed the rules under the Public Record Act request. And number 9 was about labor standards, and the recommendation was that all licensing authorities should explore amending the regulations to include violations of labor standards as part of the licensing process. And the recommendations was that these standards exist under state law in other places, but that the Bureau could amend regulations to include the specific requirements.
Okay, we need a
So I
second.
move those 4.
I'll give you a second.
All right, Mr. Sweeney. All right, any conversation, please? All right, well then we'll go on to public comment.
And just to clarify, this is for enforcement. We're voting on, the motion is to accept 2, 7, 8, and 9 on the agenda. All right, are you ready?
Yes. My name is Margot Feinberg. I'm here on behalf of the United Food and Commercial Workers State Council and UFCW Local 770 to speak on behalf of number 9, labor standards. First of all, you should know that this provision existed in Alma. The voters adopted it. It was incorporated into the state statute. And so I don't understand why it's should explore. It should be done. The voters have spoken that labor standards have to be a factor. We're concerned, we support the consumers, we support the patients, but someone needs to speak for the workers in this industry. And we have state laws, and they must be complied with. So it has to be a factor. It should be a serious violation. It should be in the violations component. That was the intent of the voters. And so we would ask that that be done. What isn't included, which I would just like to touch on quickly, is that in addition to being a serious violation, there has to be interagency coordination. The OSHA, the DLSE, all the departments within the Department of Industrial Relations know of these violations. The employers should have to self-report, but there has to be cooperation with the agencies. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Hi, my name is Virgil Grant, California Minority Alliance. Speaking on recommendation number 7. Although we don't support enforcement in the way that we have received it throughout the years, within our community, we definitely support it in this area. Absolutely. This is a regulated market. We are licensed now as collectives in the city of Los Angeles and now throughout the state, but mainly we have an issue with rogue shops. And I don't believe in giving someone an opportunity to usher into what we call a good faith compliance when we've had that opportunity for many, many years with all of the propositions that existed in LA. It is difficult for us to operate a business when we have unfair competition. Right. They do not pay taxes. No. They do not have to spend the money for the regulatory framework that we have, but we still have to compete against them. There needs to be enforcement now.
Thank you.
Right now.
All right,
Hi.
next up.
Yeah, my name is Donnie Anderson, the chair of the California Minority Alliance. When you have an unregulated market and people do what they want to do, go on Crenshaw Boulevard and see the sign up there and says, "We don't charge taxes." So guess what that's taken from our business that's located on Crenshaw Boulevard? We're losing business because people is not coming in to our shops because our taxes are too high. We need to make sure that we look at the tax issues and lowering the taxes in the same way Colorado did. This is Los Angeles and California. We've been here too long. 22 years, medical cannabis have been here. Let's get it right now, please. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Next up.
My name is Gregory McGarian. I'm also the president of the Greater Los Angeles Collectives Alliance, which is a group of the pre-ICO, Prop D compliant operators here in Los Angeles. And enforcement is a huge issue for us. We have, just like Donnie and Virgil said, we have unlicensed operators, no workman's comp, violating all kinds of labor laws, violating zoning laws, no taxes, not an asset to the community, and then they pay the good operators as the bad operators because we're charging more, which is what the regulators forced us to do with the taxes. And now we're being painted as the bad guys, not being compassionate. Enforcement has to come right now, or you're going to have legal operators going financially out of business, and then once you do enforce, you're going to have no access. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Hi, my name is Kathleen. I'm with Angeles Emerald, and I understand where these gentlemen are coming from in regards to enforcement. And I think enforcement is very important to support a regulated market, but please keep in mind that not all licenses rollout plans have rolled out, and we're still waiting even for ordinances to pass. So please consider maybe a date or a time frame of when you're going to actually start enforcement so that we could also have the opportunity to have licenses, because we're still waiting for ordinances, we're still waiting for opportunities, we're still waiting for the opportunity to even submit an application. So please consider timing.
Thank you. All right, next.
Hello, my name is Kelsey Barney. I represent Fountain of Wellbeing. We are a dispensary storefront as well as a micro business in North Hollywood, Los Angeles. We have our licensing, and I wanted to say that these unlicensed collectives know exactly what they are doing. They know that they are operating illegally, and they make it very difficult for the legal shops to make any kind of effort to maintain our taxes. They know exactly what they're doing, and they are taking our patients from us. We are finding it that our patient has dropped almost half because of websites like Weed Maps that promote these illegal shops and are allowed to continue to promote the illegal shops. If you could please look into the online advertising of places like Weed Maps as well.
Thank you.
Max Vigalonis with K Street Consulting on behalf of the California Cannabis Delivery Alliance and also the Los Angeles Delivery Alliance. I want to make a couple of comments about the unlicensed shops and unlicensed collectives that have been discussed here. Many unlicensed operators want to comply. They want to get their licenses. LA is not yet issuing delivery licenses. They cannot get those licenses. There's a timeline. They will in the future, and hopefully they'll be able to do so before January 9th, 2019, when the collective mall dissolves. Now, so long as the current unlicensed collectives stay medicinal only, they are maybe in civil violation of the regulations, but they are not in criminal violation of the law. Come January 9th, 2019, if they engage in any commercial cannabis activity, they will be in criminal and civil violation. I think that is a time to ramp up enforcement, but give them through the end of the collective mall to transition and to get local ordinances be drafted so they can get licensed in the first place.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Yeah, hi. I want to kind of echo what he was saying because, yeah, there is a lot of collectives that want to go legal. All these regulations making it extremely difficult. The financial barriers are there. The black market's not going anywhere. I don't know if you guys are aware. You guys are creating an extremely thriving black market right now. You need to separate medicinal from recreational. When this law, Prop 64, was passed, the majority of the consumers believed medicinal was not going to be touched. You guys put a stranglehold on that now. It's your guys' fault that there's a black market right now, and the state, not just you. You know, you guys represent for the state, you're that buffer. But this is what's going on. There's many shops that want to go. It's impossible. If you haven't been operating for profit, you don't have the money, you don't have the locations, and that's what I wanted to talk about earlier as far as things being statutory. We can't amend the taxes, but you can put a limit on how much testing facilities are increasing their prices 5 times in a matter of 3 months. You know, how are we supposed to compete in these small farms against these giant corporations that are coming over and basically buying up all the zones? That's what's happening.
Thank you.
Cherie Franklin with Think and Grow Lab, and I want to echo the comments. We've been trying very hard to encourage young entrepreneurs who are operating illegally to stop, and also to understand that it's impacting the viability of the business. But there's no teeth in that language because they continue to be able to operate. They're not encouraged to do the right things that they need to do to become legal. And at this point, it's going to continue throughout the rest of this year. We don't have any leverage, and when we talk to the legal operators, they're being negatively impacted, and it's truly hurting their business, not only with the retail stores, but their delivery. There's so many illegal delivery operators out there impacting people's ability to sell product in their legal businesses. And I wanted to speak on the other item in terms of enforcement, in terms of violations for with regards to labor. We have a very strong labor law here in California, and thank you. We need to not have that as a requirement. We already have coverage at the state level for that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Russ Gordon, California Growers Association. Want to speak on this unlicensed collectives issue. It's definitely a really difficult issue in terms of thinking about enforcement priorities, and I think there's different ways of looking at it, sort of depending on regional context. Definitely appreciate and hear what some of the folks from LA are saying about the struggles with unlicensed operators. From the perspective of a lot of our members on the North Coast who are trying to come into compliance with their farms, they're struggling with building code issues, they're struggling with water issues, these types of things that require some time to figure out, and they really do sort of are good faith trying to come into compliance and form, hundreds or thousands of longtime growers. So I think it's really important to focus on this phrase "good faith" in this recommendation, and that what good faith looks like may be different depending on regional context. And it's just important, on the North Coast, there's folks growing on public lands, doing real terrible damage to watersheds, and those folks should probably see more enforcement than people in good faith. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tyrone Freeman with CMA, California Minority Alliance. I want to address first the collective issue on enforcement. The irony that exists today in front of this committee is very interesting. In the community I grew up in this city, there was no compassionate, give them a second chance when you were enforcing cannabis laws, and now we have others asking, and that should be on the record. But I would say this, the reality is that this is a regulatory industry now. This is business, and you have to treat it like business. And I think it's very clear. Look, if a collective exists and they're paying state taxes, that's a good faith effort. If a collective exists and they're not paying CDFA fees, then they're not in good faith. So it's very clear. You know before you leave and send out agents whether they're paying taxes. If not, then they're not in good faith, point blank. That makes the competitive edge you heard about earlier balanced out to some extent. Can't be a collective and not paying taxes. It was required since 1996. So I also want to comment on my last 3 seconds on labor. Look, every department within this agency enforces labor in California. You shouldn't take second degree on that and enact labor rights for every working man and women in this industry and standardize fair working conditions.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, next up.
Hi, I'm Ben. As a compassionate use provider and operating as a not-for-profit clients prior, we don't have a whole bunch of money set aside, and our county hasn't even gotten through their ordinance process. They've been working on it over a year. It's a slow process, as we see here today. It's going to take some time to get through all the licenses, and I mean, it's sad to see people already crying foul, and they haven't even got through the process yet. Just because they were the first ones out the gate, because where did their money come from? All these profits that they had to spend right away on all this stuff to get their licenses, well, and then they cry foul, Well, it's not for profit. People have been operating at a zero balance for years, are struggling to get through this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Chair, that ends the public comment session.
Okay, any
Mr.
other?
Chair, I move the previous.
I have a comment before.
Yes, sir.
May I make my comment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you know, having jurisdictional purview in the County of Los Angeles, I've recognized this issue as being extraordinarily problematic, trying to bring on board a licensed industry. While there's a lot of competition out there, and there are good people in this audience who are trying to get their license, and there are people who are not here, perhaps, who are not operating in good faith. Now, I think that this particular phrasing of this recommendation, I forget what number it is, number 7 is problematic for me. What I would like to see is actually cooperation between the state and the locals so that the locals can say, yeah, these people are in good faith or they're not, and then there can be some scaled enforcement. There are some clearly very bad actors out there. We talk about damaging watersheds and things like that should be prioritized over others, I think. We have a recommendation on that we made in the youth subcommittee, and I forget why it's in the youth subcommittee, but it basically asks the state to coordinate with the locals on doing a scaled enforcement of some kind. And I prefer to support that as number 10, recommendation number 10 under the youth committee. So I would like to see, I think the other 3 recommendations are good. I'd like to support them, but if number 7 is in there, I don't think I can support a lot of them.
So why don't we do what we did on the last?
I can split them apart again, yeah.
Yeah, why don't we
I tried to
split it
them
apart
up, but not
and push 7 off to the side, and let's deal with the other ones.
Okay, so I amend my motion to now move recommendation number 2, recommendation number 8, and recommendation number 9.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Back to public comment. Anybody?
And can we just clarify for the record, that was to adopt those 3 recommendations, correct?
I think
Please
we're going to
wait
have
until you're called for
public
comment to
comment.
speak.
So I think we're going to open it up for public comment.
Yes.
Yeah, so
Thank
I
you.
think we have an individual here who'd like to speak first, and then this woman, you can go second. All right.
I just want to reinforce what I was saying, which is that the way the recommendation reads, it says that it doesn't make it mandatory. It says they should consider whether there should be labor standards. I think the words is they should explore it, and explore is just too weak. It has to be mandatory. It's already in the statute. So please, if you adopt this, can you modify that language? Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to make a comment in relation to the unlicensed collectives. This is in relation to BCC license 010 revision 1217.
I'm sorry, we're going to be, we pulled that one from this motion right now. We're going to be discussing that one in just a moment.
All right.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, we're talking about number 2, 8, and 9. Okay, next up.
Okay, on number 8, I strongly recommend for those in the North Coast, we are strongly at a disadvantage with the dual track and trace system. Our government regulators said that they had to put their own track and trace system in place because they were not feeling that they would get all the information they needed from the state. This really puts an undue burden on us with an additional $1,080 a month payment that we have to pay to the system. So if the state, and I'm begging, if you could, work with local regulators to give them the information they need so that we can have one system. It'll be clear and much less burden on the farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think that ends public comment on this specific agenda item.
Can I make a comment? I'd also like a friendly amendment based upon 2 individuals saying that it should be mandatory. I think our state, the thing that makes us so great and the things that are so much different than some of the other states contemplating this industry and what will make the state move forward in a much better way is to balance all the needs. So that's the needs of the patient, the needs of the retailer, and the needs of the worker. All of those things together is a perfect stool. Without the labor piece being a mandatory piece, we're sitting on a teetering piece where people can be exploited, and we can't afford to exploit some to help others. Thank you.
We're an advisory committee, right? I mean, we can't make something the most we can do, right, is
Yeah, I mean, I will accept the friendly amendment. I think it's a reflection of what is mandated in the law, so it's just saying that the regulations have to mandate that the licensees comply with existing labor law.
Yes.
Accept the friendly amendment.
I will accept that as a second.
Yeah, I'm sorry, we're gonna need to clarify what that is, the language.
So, let's see, I'll change the, basically taking out the word explore into recommendation number 9.
Should amend.
Oh, yes, correct.
You want my wording? I'd take out the words explore amending. It should comply. The regulation should comply to include, shall comply. Let me rephrase that. The licensed authority should require regulations to include violations of labor standards as part of the licensing process.
I'm not sure if our court reporter could hear that.
Yeah.
Maybe you could
So
repeat that
let me
for us.
just repeat it. The motion now that stands is to accept recommendation number 2. To revise number 9, that all licensing authorities are required to include violations of labor standards as part of the licensing process and enforcement, which should include revocation of the license. Did I get that correctly? Shall require regulations. Okay.
Just a clarification, I believe the motion was to adopt 2, 8, and 9 with the amendment to the language.
Yes, thank you, sorry.
That's correct, thank you.
Okay, and we have a motion and we have a second. Okay.
Yes.
Now, because we've modified this, guess what? Back to public comment. Anything? It's the same thing, basically, but
Okay, so go ahead, sir.
I would suggest that for the protection of those going through the process to include up to, not shall be, revocation. Thank you.
Okay.
should include. Still says should include. Okay, any other with the members? All right, let's go for call for the vote.
Baboulian.
Aye.
Cermak.
Aye.
Clifford. Dombrowski.
Aye.
Farrow.
Aye.
Heidelback Terremoto.
Aye.
Harada.
Aye.
Jacobson.
Aye.
Nevedal.
Aye.
Nikita.
Aye.
Peck.
Aye.
Ron.
Aye.
Stevenson.
Aye.
Sweeney.
Aye.
Todd.
Aye.
Woolsey.
Aye.
Wu.
Aye.
You.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right.
Okay, I now move recommendation number 7.
Can we read
Is that you're moving to have it adopted?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I now move for the committee to adopt recommendation number 7, which reads, "The Bureau, before taking any enforcement action on unlicensed collectives, should give the businesses the opportunity to demonstrate an attempted effort for good faith compliance." And the staff comments were that the Bureau has discretion to provide warnings and education to a person on how to obtain a license, as well as to consider information from a person before taking enforcement action.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
We do.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Any other comment?
Given that the Bureau already has the discretion, I think it's unnecessary.
Thank you, Mr. Woolsey. All right, anything else?
I have a comment.
Yeah, comments?
On this one, it's kind of tricky. At the subcommittee hearing in Sacramento a couple of weeks ago, there was a public comment, and it was interesting. They said before we were an industry, we were a community, and now it's turned into business. Here's as far as the language in that recommendation, the collective model has still been maintained until January of 2019. So to call it an unlicensed collective, it's really misleading. You're either a license holder, you're organized as a collective, or you're just illegal.
So if you're set up as a collective, none of your rights or restrictions are taken away. You can operate as a collective. If you do go through and you want to participate in the industry side, the business side of it, the regulator with the license, at some point, you got to draw the line. It's never going to be fair. We're at a point right now where we're the biggest state, we're the biggest market. At one point or another, everybody was unlicensed. We've been talking about MCRSA and then AUMA and then MCAURSA for the past 2 years, 2.5 years. At some point, you draw the line, and is it going to be fair for everybody involved? Probably not. Is it ever going to be fair for people involved? Probably not. So recognizing that we've already, as a state, started issuing licenses, on one hand, it isn't fair to the people that did go through the process, spend the money, get the license, pay the taxes and all that. On the other hand, it's not fair to the collectives that are going through the process right now that don't happen to have a license. In the grand scheme of things, I think the next 6 months, the next 12 months, this isn't a short-term thing. This is long-term. This is an industry. This is the future, the next big industry. Sacrifices have to be made, and I think everybody's got to do their part. So as far as the collective piece of it, I think it's the language in there that kind of has it a little bit uneasy for me with the unlicensed collective model. So if we're talking about licensed operators, I think, yeah, enforcement should happen. On the collective model, I think that should be maintained. So it's which model are we talking about? Which sector are we talking about?
I additionally have some concerns about this. You know, I understand there's a lot of issues around dispensaries and how that aspect of the industry is developing, but from a cultivation perspective, we have, especially in the North Coast area, we have seen more enforcement on the licensed entities, especially from Department of Fish and Wildlife and the water boards, than we've seen on unlicensed entities. And I have a lot of concern about how that plays out. It doesn't necessarily encourage anyone to come into compliance when the enforcement has been very heavy-handed in the licensed or the compliance arena. Folks that have come into the water board order have had more issues, and it's been exponentially challenging up there. And then these cultivators are spending excessive amounts of money to try to come into compliance and maintain compliance, and they're finding themselves competing in the marketplace against backpacks, and there's no way for them to meet those prices. It's not possible economically. So I just wanted to express I have concerns about this, and I don't really understand what the intention here is of this.
Yeah, and I'll just speak really quickly to the intention. It was I don't think anything about it reads, and the intent of it certainly within the committee was that this is about not enforcing or not in taking enforcement actions, but it's just recognizing the time that we're in, the complication with compliance, the variance in local ordinances, the time that it's taking, that before an enforcement action is taken, just that there's a pause to see what the situation is, and if the person is in good faith and working towards compliance and is likely to get there, that's considered before an enforcement action is taken. So nothing about it is about not enforcing against those who are unlicensed. It's about just pausing to take a look to see what's going on before enforcement action is brought.
Member Stevenson, I'd like to say, at this point in time, with an emerging paradigm, in order for us to get on the right footing, we've got to take a hardline stance. And many of the operators within industry have known for over 2 years what was coming. Even though some of them operate in a quagmire with local municipalities, that's not a defensible position. It's up to local municipalities to take the lead and engage in this industry if they want to. What we saw is local rights was the initial start in becoming regulated. There's no service that I think you can provide in the state without having a license. You can't practice medicine without a license. You can't cut hair without a license. You can't operate a mortuary without a license. So as members of this body, we have to make the decision that this started January 1st, and it's much easier for the industry to move ahead together than to have certain segments of the industry move forward while others operate in a gray market, I would say.
It looks to me, when I review this, that if we do not pass it, that the Bureau still has discretion, and if we do pass it, the Bureau has discretion. And in no case do they have the discretion to just simply say you never have to have a license. It's just a way of them having discretion to facilitate those that they believe should be facilitated to get a license as soon as possible. And I assume their discretion would say those that don't need to be facilitated should be shut down.
That's why I grouped it with those things that the Bureau can already do and is doing.
Okay, so let's go ahead and move to public comment.
Public comment. We'll start with the gentleman at the far right in the black.
Yes, hello. I wanted to bring to the board's attention that one thing that was overlooked during the discussion of unlicensed collectives is unlicensed events these collectives are also throwing. It's another revenue source that's not taxed. If you're following the guidelines and you're following the frameworks, those are more of the people that are trying to put out good information, trying to educate the public, but they're the ones who also have to pay a $1,000 fee. And according to subsection C of the form, they are restricted only to District Agricultural Association, event, and county fairgrounds. That puts a real bottleneck if you're trying to actually act within the framework to get things done. If you're running an unlicensed collective, you can just throw a party and you have an event. Not only are you bringing in revenue, but what type of information are you putting out there? Is it even accurate? If you're following the framework, you're severely limited. I put forward a motion that the limitation of only fairgrounds and district agricultural events should be lifted, and that the licensure for cannabis events should be able to be at different facilities.
Thank you. All right, next up. Yeah, if you could, yeah, just, thank you. Okay, go ahead.
Sorry, me, you?
Whichever one.
All right.
I wasn't watching.
Virgil Grant, CMA. I spent 6 years in federal prison for owning and operating legal and legitimate medical marijuana facilities, the same ones that the city gave me a license for and the state granted me a license for. I was doing the right thing. So I understand when we talk about enforcement, I was enforced upon in the wrong way. But I'm here doing it the right way, once again, and then I have somebody over here doing it the wrong way, and that's okay. But I spent 6 years in federal prison? I don't think so. We fought for Proposition M in LA. Proposition M is here. And we're going to make sure we fight for enforcement so that there is fair and equitable participation. We're not saying that these collectives can't get licensed, but wait your turn. Get in line. Do it the right way, the same way we did it. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm just going to ask that if you've already made a comment on this agenda item, then we're just going to go once. Okay, so next up.
Hope that begins after my comment there. Tyrone Freeman, CMA. I wanted to offer some solution from what we've heard. I think discretion should be defined by some clear objective criteria. So the clear objective criteria, because the deference variable between the rogue and those who are seeking license is the tax issue. We've heard some of those examples. So being objective, the Bureau could enforce the fact that if you pay state taxes, if you pay local taxes, and you pay your federal taxes, I mean, you show those forms, then the Bureau could use discretion as to educating you on how to get your license. Point blank. If you go into a shop and they're not doing those three things, the difference between legal and illegal right now, you heard, were taxes. Let's address it. Let's be proactive. Let's make this right, as the committee said. The longer you wait and let that activity go, the less likely you are to have successful regulation. 3 criteria that are objective: federal, state, local taxes. Show me the form. We decide to educate you. You don't have them, we shut you down. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Hi, Kathleen with Angeles Emeralds, and I think recommendation maybe could be written to have a specific date where this extra regulation would commence, because in their interim, there's still rollout plans, like I said, that are being waited to roll out. And so I think maybe we could consider this extra enforcement when these plans actually roll out, and we could bring the enforcement along with these rollout plans. And I mean, there's the collective model that is still there. These collectives are really trying very hard to comply with the regulated industry. And there's BOE filings that you could analyze. There's so much. There's the nonprofit mutual benefits corporation paperwork that you can analyze. There's so much that you can go through to make sure that these collectives are complying to a certain extent, including, and the more taxes you collect, the more you can enforce. So I think you need to give these collectives opportunities to actually participate in this regulated market and pay their taxes. And thank you.
Thank you. All right.
All right. So when Greg McGarrian, I'm specifically addressing the retail storefronts. For a long time, many of us in Los Angeles, since 2007, when the first of us, the city forced us to register during the ICO, Interim Control Ordinance. And then 2008, we got DEA threat letters because we were on the list. I've been part of this whole process going through from 2006 to now. And we understand the collective model really well, because that's how we were operating. But a major majority of these illicit operators are not operating under how collective's supposed to be, according to the Attorney General's guidelines. And also, collective does not mean adult use. So when you have a sign on Van Nuys saying 15 cap, 21 and over, don't tell me you're a collective. You're doing commercial cannabis activity, and that is illegal if you don't have a license. We know, because we waited over 10 years for it. Okay, so enforcement has to start now. Just like Virgil said, the longer you wait, the harder it's going to be, and the bigger the black market's going to get. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Thank you. Max McLeod, K Street Consulting. Want to agree with actually that last comment to reiterate. Collectives are only valid if they're medicinal only. If there is an unlicensed adult use collective, that's in violation of Mao Cursa's laws regarding illegal adult use sales. And so a medical only collective that is paying its excise taxes, that is paying its sales and use taxes to CDTFA, that is collecting a cultivation tax, we would urge that those be criteria to consider for leniency while they go and get their state license until January 9th, 2019. On January 10th, 2019, you're either a licensee or you're straight up illegal, and it's a different conversation. But until that date, we'd like the transition period, and not breaking the law, not doing adult use, not having environmental damage are important criteria.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Is that going to start? Okay. My name is Connor Johnston, and I worked for the president of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors for a long time. So given that experience, and in the interest of time, since it seems this meeting may not end until October, I just wanted to offer one procedural suggestion. And if this body is subject to a different Robert's Rules of Order, or if you have a clerk that is stipulated otherwise, ignore what I'm about to say. But you should not have to make a motion on a number of items and then hear public comment on one of them multiple times. You could call those items, discuss them, take public comment, and decide what motions you want to take at that point. Or you could make the motion at the top, as you have been doing, and then divide the question. So if there's controversy about one item, divide that question and take that vote separately, but it shouldn't be subject to additional public comment, nor does it need to take an additional round of discussion and motions. There are more efficient ways to do this, which I hope we could employ in the interest of everyone's time.
Thank you. All right, next up.
I was going to talk about the illegal operators. I'm from the Inland Empire, and I work with the city of San Bernardino, who has over 140 dispensaries. None of them are illegal. Well, actually, there's a couple that are illegal now. And the problem there is they want to apply, as everybody here. What I see, though, is that there's nobody trying to bridge the gap. When somebody from the city would come and knock on your door, you were not going to talk to them. Now I think we have to take a different approach, and we have to invite these operators in and help them. So while you're setting up the social equity program and you have all these qualifiers, you don't have any support for these guys. There's nobody that's going to sit there. There's no incubator programs. And that's something that I think is really important that you think about moving forward, or maybe just pairing them with somebody that they can work with so that they can continue doing the good work they're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Hi there, my name's Alexander Jadani. I just want to note that a big part of this is giving the business the opportunity to demonstrate an attempted effort for good faith compliance, and I feel like a significant roadblock right now is the testing problem, that there's not enough availability and that the price is too high, and that by opening up more licenses to testing facilities, that it will give greater availability for these unlicensed facilities to comply with the regulations, and they won't be so cost prohibitive in coming online.
Thank
if we
you.
open up more facilities for testing.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Hi, my name is Wesley Hine. I'd like to talk about something new, enforcing unlicensed dispensaries. I know of brands that are out there that started off charging taxes, but they are now backsliding because of the state's inability to even start addressing the unlicensed dispensaries. I know of inspections that are going on from state inspectors that are talking about such technical issues such as weight masters.
So the agenda item is just on collectives.
And on number, thank you very much. What I was going to say is state resources are being used in things that have nothing to do with closing the illegal dispensaries and addressing those. And in my opinion, Lori, you in particular have been given a monumental task, but you will fail if you do not immediately start addressing the unlicensed dispensaries. Number 7, in my opinion, is more than just silly, it's counterproductive. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Danny Shaker, Think and Grow Lab. This is not just about the unlicensed illegal dispensaries. We need to keep in mind the thousands of people who are waiting to get into this industry, and if they find out that there's a pathway to licensing, if they just open up illegally, what's to stop a new wave of unlicensed dispensaries to start opening tomorrow? We get phone calls every day asking us, hey, if we should open up a dispensary, and we advise them not to. But if this passes, I cannot advise them not to, because now they have a legal path to licensing if they're an illegal dispensary. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Jimmy Diamond. Last year I worked in an illegal dispensary. There's a lot of talk about enforcement, but there's no talks about job fairs. There's no, I've been looking for a job for months. Nobody in here is really talking about hiring yet. So when you talk about enforcement, there's a lot of people that are working right now that aren't really supposed to be working. So we need a place to go to. Some of us can't be license holders. Some of us can't really make it in traditional job settings. We need to smoke. You know, I have a SSI application pending for like 10 years. It's constantly one more piece of paper I got to submit. So I understand what people are going through with licensing, but where's the job fairs? Where are we supposed to go to that are working illegally? Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next up.
Good afternoon. My name is Jonathan Svetko. I'm with Angeles Emeralds. I believe this conversation is a lot more nuanced than we're giving it credit for. For us to consider this as a simply black and white issue of wrong or right, it's much more complex than that. And the members I see here in front of me have an incredible amount of brain trust to be able to figure out more out-of-the-box thinking for that. Prop 64 was meant to, in spirit, meant to give us all a pathway to licensure. And due to the time it takes for regulations to come online that I think many of us didn't foresee at that time, it has now led us to have this conversation here. What my concerns are is that if we're going to start doing enforcements before pretty much many or the majority of jurisdictions come online, that all we're going to be doing is recriminalizing the same people that we've been trying to take out of what we're going on with. When we see now cities like San Francisco, San Diego, and most recently Los Angeles County starting to look towards an automated expungement process, it's very concerning for me that we don't match our regulations policies to go along with what our compassionate kind of policies are coming forward with the expungement. So please consider more outside of the box thinking for this. Thank you.
All right, next up.
Hi, my name is Dominic, and I represent a cannabis manufacturing business. And I believe there's obviously a lot of controversy regarding the retailers and the licensed retailers and and the collectives that are operating, especially in the city of Los Angeles, and the competition due to the pricing of products. However, one thing that hasn't been mentioned is the supply chain. In regards to the cultivators becoming licensed, a large majority of the cultivators are not licensed in Northern California, and I encourage the Bureau to reach out to those parts of Northern California and those localities and those local farmers who really need to become a part of the licensed group and start supplying the licensed suppliers. So I encourage you to look into not only just the competition between the retailers, but the supply chain as well, because the last thing we want is that there is a shortage of supply for all licensed collectives throughout the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. That closes the public comment.
Okay. Well, with that said, let's go ahead and, any other comment or just move on to a roll call vote?
Chairman, I have one comment that we haven't spoken about. It has to do with public safety, background checks, fire inspections, and the overall safety of facilities. I think when we rubber stamp the unlicensed collective models to move forward, we're also accepting some form of liability when you talk about fire inspection. In Oakland, they had the ghost ship fire that 36 people died in. And it's not that we have to take a position of, do we provide opportunities? Do we close the door? I think it's obvious and without any hindrance of what should be done. And I would like that to be what's really at the forefront. Are we doing the best job for public safety? Are we being compliant in terms of background checks of the operators? Are these facilities safe? And at the end of the day, I think if we take those things into account, we'll be in a much better position.
Thank you. All right.
I have one comment, and it's just that I'm sitting here left with the feeling that the man from CMA who made the comments about if you're not paying taxes, I don't see why I should give discretion to those who have not been paying taxes. So I wonder if there's a willingness to have a friendly amendment regarding discretion for those that are paying taxes.
I'm actually not going to take the friendly amendment because I think the spirit of the recommendation as a whole is that the agency looks to see if there's good faith compliance. And for sometimes that's going to mean you're demonstrating that you're paying taxes would be a good demonstration of good faith compliance. But I'm not sure. I think the conversation we've heard has been very framed around the location where we are right now. And if we were maybe in a cultivation area or in the North Coast, it might be quite different. But I think that there's other things that could also be indicative of good faith compliance, and I'm concerned about indicating that that's the only criteria. I mean, I think the agency should have a lot of discretion in enforcement. They should have had a lot of discretion in determining what's good faith compliance, and I don't think we want to take that discretion away from them. I think that's the thrust of what it is, that they can determine what looks like good faith. And
I'd like to add a couple of things too on this. There was a public comment about employees and benefits and all that. I had direct interest in an operation that had to be shut down and employees let go strictly because licensing had come up. As far as time and opportunity to get in compliance, look, Ms. Stevenson already mentioned it. We kind of had 2 years, over 2 years, and for a lot of us, we've been working towards this for what, 20 years now? 15 years now? And at some point, again, going back, you gotta draw the line, because when you're talking about employees and payroll and all that, You're not getting that from the unlicensed businesses. You're getting that from the licensed businesses. The unlicensed businesses, you're creating more of an employee risk. If that place was to be raided, the employees go down with it. It's the licensed facilities that end up becoming above ground, that are able to provide benefits, that are able to provide everything that you get in with traditional employment. And this isn't, we're all talking about it as it relates to retail. This is something that's not just retail directed. This is up and down the supply chain from the seed all the way to the point it gets to the consumer, whether it's through a delivery or a retail storefront. The way I'm reading this recommendation, it's really not changing much other than recommending or suggesting that the unlicensed collective be given an opportunity to demonstrate compliance. The problem is, compliance is having a license. It's a license holder to license holder transaction. You either have it or you don't. If you're a collective, you're allowed to be a collective until January 19. If you're not a collective and you want to operate as a business and you don't have a license, there's really nothing there to demonstrate. Because now if you create an opportunity for demonstrating compliance, you're also creating an opportunity for a lot of things to be open to interpretation. And that's where you get into issues. You could get into issues, then you got appeals stuff that you have to deal with. So then the question becomes, when do you draw the line? At some point, enforcement happens, and personally, I think we're at that point right now.
I'd like to say something too, because we had committee member Nachita talk about agencies working together, and I think if our agencies are working together, both at the bureaus inspectors as well as county and city inspectors, we can start moving more rapidly on those that to find out if in fact they are paying taxes, if they are having a safe workplace like Mr. Stevenson said. I think that's the urgency, right? Because even though we have this window of time for a year for collectives, we don't want the public subjected to people who are operating in a space that's unsafe or consuming products that are unsafe, or that people are operating and not paying their taxes when they're, required to, or that they're advertising that they're not collecting taxes. I mean, there are several things that we need to do, and I think that the way it's written, given the agency what we expect from them, basically these discussions are giving the agencies what we think should be, and even though it's pretty broad in nature, I think they'll get the idea of what we want. If this industry is going to succeed, the commercial industry's got to succeed. And if we don't protect those that are following the rules and doing the right thing, we're going to have an industry that's going to fail, and we're going to have people pointing at us saying, see, we told you so. So I'll leave it at that.
And I'm going to make one more comment on this, and it hasn't been touched on. There is a lot of blaming at the state level. This is really a local licensing issue. I don't think there's anybody that submitted an application to the state after January and has been in the queue for the last 2-3 months waiting for their license to come through. The bottleneck is really at the local level, and what I would suggest is there are a lot of people here. You go up and down the state, whether the hearing's in Sacramento, they're there. They're sitting at the microphone. If it's in Oakland, they're going to be there sitting at the microphone. I think a lot of that effort also has to be directed to the local municipalities, because it really starts with them. You get your local license, you apply to the state, whichever bureau you apply to. I mean, the state's created a temporary license. The state's created a 6-month transition period. We've got this committee that's making recommendations left and right. At some point, the blame's got to be kind of directed to the right place, and as much comments, as many comments as people want to make, you got to get active. Got to get active. Got to get in front of the local councils. Got to just participate in the process. But I don't think it's a state issue as much as it is a local issue. And as far as the state enforcement, again, to reiterate what I said earlier, I think we're at that point right now.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and do a roll call vote.
And just a note for the record, Member Dombrowski has left, but we still have quorum. Bulbullion.
Nay.
Cermak.
Nay.
Clifford.
No.
Farrow.
No.
Heidelbeck Terremoto.
Abstain.
Harada.
Nay.
Jacobson.
Nay.
Nevedal.
Abstain.
Nikita.
No.
Peck.
No.
Ron.
No.
Stevenson.
Emphatically, no.
Sweeney. Todd.
Aye.
Woolsey.
Nay.
Wu.
No.
You.
No.
Motion fails.